The mist danced among the valleys of the Rocky Mountains on that autumn dawn. The cold, dense air carried scents of damp earth and dry leaves as John Woodman lit the wood stove in his simple wooden house, strategically built atop a hill where every sunrise was a privilege reserved for few. At 65, John bore on his weathered face the wisdom of those born and raised in harmony with nature. His calloused hands, shaped by years of woodworking, told stories his hoarse voice rarely shared. A respected lumberjack in the region, he knew every trail, every tree, every stone of those mountains, like a man knows his own children. "The coffee tastes different today, doesn't it?" he murmured to himself, watching the steam rise from his blue agate mug, an heirloom from his father. There was something in the air, not just the lingering chill giving way to the first hints of summer. It was a restlessness, as if the mountains themselves were breathing differently. The birds sang in an unfamiliar rhythm, and the wind, usually steady at that altitude, was strangely absent. As he left his house, he followed the winding path leading to the small village of Mountain Ridge Village. Few were awake at that hour, but Granny Willow, the 70-year-old local healer, was already in her rocking chair on the porch, as if waiting for John to pass by. "Good morning, Granny. Up so early," he greeted, slowing his steps. "Those who sleep too much miss the world's messages, my son," she replied with an enigmatic smile, her dark, deep eyes fixed on him. "Be careful today, the mountains are restless." John Woodman nodded without question. He'd known Granny Willow since childhood and understood that her words, however cryptic, carried truths reason couldn't always grasp. "I'm just fetching wood for the church altar," like Father Anthony asked. "The church can wait. The yellow epee from the ancestral glade is waiting for you too, but for a different reason," she said, lowering her voice. "Pay attention to the signs." He set off, his axe slung over his shoulder, and an uneasy feeling in his hands that this wouldn't be an ordinary day. The trail leading to the sacred glade, known to few, demanded respect. It was a narrow path, nearly hidden among vines and giant ferns, where sunlight filtered through in golden rays that seemed to dance on the forest floor. When he reached the glade, he spotted the majestic yellow epee, perfect for the altar. Its strong, resilient wood would last generations, and its straight trunk would make the work easier. He approached with reverence, as he always did before any cut. Touching the trunk, he silently asked for permission, just as his grandfather had taught him. The first swings of the axe echoed through the woods, steady and precise. With each strike, he felt the tree's natural resistance, its life force, its story. He worked for nearly an hour until the trunk began to give way. That's when the unexpected happened. A sharp thunderclap, with no clouds to justify it, shattered the forest's silence. The air grew suddenly heavy, hard to breathe, and the trunk, almost completely cut through, moved against all laws of physics, as if pushed by invisible hands, falling in the opposite direction John Woodman had planned. The impact was violent. The lumberjack tried to scramble away, but he wasn't fast enough. His right leg was trapped under the weight of the tree. The pain was intense, throbbing, but the worst part was the feeling of helplessness. He was too far away for his screams to be heard. He tried to free himself multiple times with no success. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon when he noticed a strange movement in the dry leaves around him. Small whirlwinds formed, carrying an ancient scent, a mix of smoke and damp earth. The ground trembled subtly, and then it appeared. If this story intrigued you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit like. Tell us which city you're watching from, and let's continue. From the dense woods, without a single sound to announce its arrival, emerged a massive black buffalo of staggering proportions. Its thick fur shimmered with bluish reflections under the light filtering through the treetops, and its amber eyes, deep like ancient wells, locked onto John Woodman with a disconcerting intensity. The animal approached slowly, its massive hooves barely touching the ground of the glade. There was no fear in its movements, only an ancestral certainty that made John Woodman hold his breath. The buffalo sniffed the air and began digging around the fallen trunk with precise motions, as if it knew exactly what needed to be done. "It can't be," John Woodman murmured, vaguely recalling stories told by his grandfather on winter nights about guardians of the mountains who appeared only in crucial moments. The animal's strength was astonishing. With each effort, the pressure on John Woodman's leg lessened, until he finally managed to drag himself away. The buffalo stopped, staring at him intently for a few seconds that felt eternal, before silently vanishing into the woods, leaving no tracks or footprints to prove its existence. With his leg throbbing and his heart racing from something greater than fear, John Woodman managed to stand and begin the journey back to the village, leaning on an improvised branch as a cane. The sun was already setting when he spotted the first houses of Mountain Ridge Village. The pain was intense, but something inside him had changed, an inexplicable certainty that he had just witnessed something few humans had ever seen. As he neared the village, he noticed an unusual commotion. A group of men was talking animatedly in front of Mr. Harold's small store, and they all seemed surprised to see John Woodman limping down the path. "John Woodman, what happened to you, man?" asked Mr. Harold, rushing to help him. "An accident in the woods. A tree," he replied vaguely, reluctant to share the full experience. "You need to see Granny Willow right away," exclaimed Mr. Harold, signaling for two young men to assist. "First, tell me what's happening in the village. You all seem uneasy," asked John Woodman, noticing the worried expressions on their faces. Mr. Harold exchanged glances with the other men before answering. "A company from the capital arrived today. They say they're building a luxury resort here in the mountains. They brought documents, spoke to the mayor. It seems everything's already settled." The news hit John Woodman harder than the pain in his leg. A resort would mean deforestation. Roads, tourists, the end of the peace and balance the mountains had always provided. "Where do they plan to build?" he asked, dreading the answer. "In Elderston Valley, they say it's the most beautiful spot for the chalet views," replied one of the young men. "It'll create jobs for plenty of people." Elderstone Valley was near the sacred ancestral glade. It was one of the most preserved and mystical places in the region, filled with rock formations that, according to the elders, told the story of the mountains themselves. Too weary to argue, at that moment, John Woodman let them take him to Granny Willow's house. The healer was waiting on the porch, as if she already knew of his arrival. Her piercing gaze seemed to read his entire experience in the forest before John could even speak. "So he appeared to you," she said, not as a question but as a statement, while guiding him into her simple yet cozy home, decorated with dried herbs hanging from the ceiling and shelves lined with jars of medicinal remedies. "How do you know?" he asked, surprised, as he sat on the makeshift bed she pointed to. "Some things I see before they happen. Others I know because they were written by those who came before us," she replied cryptically, beginning to examine his wounded leg. "The black buffalo only appears when the mountains are in danger. He chooses his messenger carefully." As she applied an herbal balm that immediately eased the pain, Granny Willow told John about an old journal left by her grandmother, Frances of the Ages, which contained accounts of guardian creatures that emerged during pivotal moments in the mountains. "History. The buffalo is the rarest of all. The most powerful too," she explained, her nimble fingers bandaging John's leg with skill honed over decades of practice. "He chose you, John Woodman, and that means you have a mission." "What mission?" he asked, feeling a shiver run down his spine as he remembered the animal's amber eyes, so ancient and wise. Granny Willow stood and walked to an old chest in the corner of the room. From it, she pulled out a bundle wrapped in faded cloth. Unwrapping it, she revealed a book with a leather cover worn by time, its yellowed pages filled with delicate handwriting. The scent of dried herbs filled the small room, lit only by candles, as Granny Willow opened the old journal with reverence. Her wrinkled hands turned the pages carefully, as if handling a fragile treasure. "This journal belonged to my grandmother, Frances of the Ages," she explained, her voice taking on a solemn tone. "She was known as the woman who spoke to the mountains. Many called her crazy, while others sought her out in secret for cures and advice." John Woodman adjusted himself on the makeshift bed, ignoring the pain in his leg to get a better look at the book. The pages contained not only text, but also detailed drawings of plants, animals, and rock formations from the region. Over 80 years ago, my grandmother began recording encounters with what she called the Guardians of the Mountains. Granny, Willow continued, stopping at a specific page that showed a perfect sketch of a black buffalo with amber eyes. This one, the buffalo you met today, is considered the chief protector. Frances saw it only once when she was nearly 30. It was during a great drought that threatened to destroy the entire region. John Woodman studied the drawing, amazed by the resemblance. It was the exact same animal that had saved him in the forest, depicted with unsettling precision, as if Francis of the Ages had been by his side in that glade. According to the journal, the buffalo appears when something threatens the life balance of the mountains, explained Granny Willow, flipping a few more pages. And it always chooses a messenger. A messenger for what? Asked John, his voice quieter than usual, as if afraid someone might overhear their conversation. To prevent destruction, she replied simply. In my grandmother's case, the buffalo led her to a hidden spring that saved the village from drought. In your case, she paused, glancing out the window toward the mountains darkened by the sunset. It might have something to do with those city men who arrived today. A heavy silence settled between them. John knew the proposed resort would mean more than just construction. It would mark the beginning of an irreversible change for the mountains and all who had lived there in harmony for generations. Is there anything else in this journal? Any clue about what I should do? He asked, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. Granny Willow flipped through the diary until she reached the last pages, where a hand-drawn map spanned 2 full sheets. It was a detailed map of the mountains, with markings at specific locations, including the sacred glade where John Woodman had found the buffalo. This map shows places of power in the mountains, points where the life energy is strongest, where the veil between worlds is thinnest, explained the healer. See this mark here? She pointed to a double circle drawn at what appeared to be the highest point of the mountains. My grandmother called it Ancestral Glade. According to her, it's a place where all the guardians gather. I know nearly every inch of these mountains, but I've never heard of this place, remarked John Woodman, intrigued, because it only reveals itself to those who've been called, replied Granny Willow with a mysterious smile. The path is marked on the map, but only those who carry the Guardian's call can see the trails that lead there. At that moment, firm knocks at the door interrupted their conversation. Granny Willow quickly hid the diary under a shawl and went to answer. Through the slightly open door, John Woodman caught a glimpse of a sharply dressed man in a suit, her stark contrast to the simple attire of the locals. Good evening, ma'am. I'm Richard Mason, Director of Horizon Ventures. The man introduced himself with an overly cordial tone. We're visiting residents to explain the benefits our resort will bring to the community. May I come in for a moment? I'm busy. Right now, young man. I have a patient, replied Granny Willow curtly. Ah, I understand. He craned his neck, trying to peek inside the house. Anyway, we're organizing a meeting tomorrow at the church hall. It'll be at 10 in the morning. We expect all the residents to attend and hear about our project. We'll be there, she answered, shutting the door before he could say another word. When she returned to John Woodman's side, Granny Willow's expression was grim. They've already started working fast, she remarked, retrieving the journal from its hiding spot. First they win people over with promises, then they take what they want. I need to see this so-called project with my own eyes, said John Woodman, trying to stand but stopped by the pain. You need to rest tonight. Your leg is badly hurt, Granny Willow warned, helping him settle back down. Tomorrow we'll go to the meeting together, but first, she picked up the journal and handed it to him. Take this with you. Read carefully. Francis of the Ages' words will be your guide now. Through the window, night had fully settled in. In the sky, the crescent moon cast a silvery light over the mountains, creating mysterious shadows among the trees. John Woodman accepted the journal, feeling its historical weight in his hands. The next morning dawned clear, with an intense blue sky that contrasted with the tension hanging over Mountain Ridge Village. Leaning on an improvised cane and with his leg carefully bandaged, John Woodman walked slowly toward the church. where the meeting with Horizon Ventures representatives had already gathered nearly all the villagers. During the night, he had spent hours absorbed in Francis of the Ages' journal. The words of the old healer, written with a mix of poetry and scientific precision, described the natural cycles of the mountains, forgotten rituals, and, most importantly, stories about the guardians. Each protector animal had specific traits, symbolizing different aspects of nature. The rare and powerful black buffalo was described as the primordial force of the earth, the one who awakens when the deepest roots are threatened. As he entered the parish hall adjacent to the small church, John Woodman felt all eyes turned to him. His accident in the forest was already common knowledge, but few knew the real details of what had happened. "Glad you could make it, Mr. Woodman," greeted Father Anthony, a middle-aged man with kind eyes that reflected concern. "We were just hearing about the project." At the center of the hall, standing before an impressive model showing the complete transformation of Elderstone Valley, was Richard Mason, the same man who had visited Granny Willow the night before. Beside him, an elegant woman in her 40s with impeccably styled hair and a tablet in hand, smiled with practiced confidence. "As I was saying, the Golden Ridge Eco-Resort will be a model of sustainable development," Richard continued, pointing to different areas of the model. "We'll have eco-friendly trails, luxury cabins integrated into the landscape, and, most importantly, jobs for the entire community." John Woodman observed the faces around him. There was hope in the eyes of many, especially the younger ones, who saw an opportunity to work without having to leave the mountains for the big cities. But he also noticed skepticism in the older folks' gazes. Perhaps they sensed the long-term consequences behind those shiny promises. "What about the valley's springs?" John asked, his deep voice drawing everyone's attention. "Elderstone Valley feeds the streams that supply not just our village, but all the crops on the hillsides." An awkward silence followed his question. Richard exchanged a quick glance with the woman beside him, before answering with a confident smile. "You must be John Woodman, am I right? I've heard a lot about the famous guardian of the mountains," he said in a slightly condescending tone. "Let me introduce our environmental engineer, Dr. Elizabeth Fields. She can address your concerns better." The woman stepped forward, her professional smile unwavering. "We've conducted extensive studies on the hydrological impact, Mr. Woodman. Our construction will minimally affect the natural water flow. In fact, part of our project includes revitalizing some of the springs." "Can I see these studies?" asked John Woodman, keeping his tone respectful but firm. "Of course," she replied, visibly uncomfortable. "But they're technical documents, quite complex for those outside the field." A murmur of indignation spread among the elders in the room, while John Woodman simply smiled calmly. "I've lived 65 years in these mountains, Doctor. Maybe I won't understand your technical terms, but I know every drop of water that flows down these slopes. It'd be a pleasure to learn from your studies." At that moment, the hall doors opened and Granny Willow entered, leaning on her carved wooden cane. Despite her advanced age, her posture was upright and her gaze was piercing. She walked straight to the center of the hall, positioning herself beside John Woodman like a silent ally. "Well, let's continue with the presentation," said Richard Mason, trying to regain control of the situation. "Besides the economic benefits, our resort will promote local culture. We're planning a crafts wing, where regional artisans can display and sell their work." The meeting went on for another hour, with increasingly elaborate promises alternating with increasingly specific questions from John Woodman and a few other, older residents. When it finally ended, the community was clearly divided. The younger ones excited about the prospect of jobs and modernization, the elders wary of the profound changes that venture would bring. As he left the hall, John Woodman felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Elizabeth, the environmental engineer, now without her professional smile. "Mr. Woodman, can we speak in private?" she asked, her tone very different from the one she'd used during the presentation. Intrigued, John Woodman nodded, and together they walked to a bench under a sprawling tree in the central square. Granny Willow watched them from far, attentive. "What I'm about to say could cost me my job," Elizabeth began, checking to make sure no one was nearby. The studies were manipulated. The valley's springs will be affected drastically. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked, studying the woman's face carefully. "My grandfather was like you," she replied, her gaze drifting to the distant mountains. "Her man who knew every tree by name, every bird by its song. I became an environmental engineer to protect places like this, not to destroy them." The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the square as John Woodman processed Elizabeth's revelations. The environmental engineer seemed genuinely distressed, her eyes shifting between the distant mountains and the cobblestones at her feet. "The truth is, this project will throw the entire mountain ecosystem out of balance," she continued, lowering her voice even further. "It's not just about the springs. Elderstone Valley is a crucial ecological corridor for numerous species. Once disrupted, there's no going back." John Woodman finished, thinking of the black buffalo and what its appearance meant. "But why is Horizon so particularly interested in this valley? There are other equally beautiful spots in the mountains for a resort." Elizabeth hesitated, as if calculating how much she could reveal. "It's not just a resort they want to build," she finally confessed. "Preliminary studies suggest the possibility of rare minerals beneath the valley's rock formations. The resort is just the first phase, a way to establish legal presence in the area." The revelation hit John like a physical blow. Mining would mean the complete destruction not only of the valley, but potentially the entire mountain range. "I have documents," Elizabeth continued, discreetly opening her bag and showing a folder. "Copies of the real studies, not the doctored ones we presented publicly. I also have internal emails discussing the project's Phase 2. "Why are you risking your job to show me this?" John questioned, still cautious. "Because last night I had a dream," she replied, her gaze now locked directly with the lumberjacks. "A massive black buffalo with eyes that seemed to hold all the time in the world. It led me to you." A shiver ran down John Woodman's spine. "The buffalo was acting, gathering allies. I thought it was just a strange dream, maybe anxiety about the project," Elizabeth continued. "But when I saw you in the meeting today, I recognized your face. It was exactly like in the dream." "I know. It sounds crazy." "It doesn't sound crazy to me," John Woodman interrupted gently. "In these mountains, dreams are sometimes truer than the reality we touch." Across the square, Granny Willow approached slowly, her sharp eyes assessing the conversation from a distance. Beside her walked a young man around 20 years old, tall and lean, with features reminiscent of John Woodman himself in his youth. "This is my grandson, Gabriel," Granny Willow introduced when they reached the bench. "He came from the city a month ago to stay with me. Gabriel studies computer science." The young man extended his hand to John Woodman, who shook it firmly, and then to Elizabeth, who seemed momentarily surprised by his presence. "My grandmother told me about your encounter in the forest, Mr. John," said Gabriel, his soft voice contrasting with his height, "and also about those businessmen." "Gabriel can help us in ways we can't even imagine," explained Granny Willow, with an enigmatic smile. "The new and the old wisdoms must come together now." Elizabeth looked confusedly at the three of them, clearly trying to understand the dynamic between them. "You can trust her, Grandma," said Gabriel after studying Elizabeth's face for a moment. "She bears the mark." "What mark?" asked Elizabeth, growing more intrigued. "The mark of those chosen by the ridge," replied Granny Willow simply, as if it were obvious. "It's not something seen with ordinary eyes." A small group of children ran past the square, their laughter momentarily breaking the seriousness of the conversation. When they were gone, John Woodman made a decision. "Come with me," he said, standing with some difficulty due to his injured leg. "We need to go to my house. There's something you must see." The path to John's house was walked in a silence, heavy with anticipation. The sun was beginning to set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that reflected off the windows of the village's simple homes. A few residents watched with curiosity. It was unusual to see the solitary woodsman accompanied by anyone, especially someone clearly from the outside, like Elizabeth. The wooden house, built by John Woodman himself decades ago, was strategically located at the point where the village ended and the forest began. From its porch, one could take in both the community and the vast green expanse of the Rocky Mountains, stretching as far as the eye could see. "Come in," he invited, opening the rustic door that had never needed a lock. The interior was simple, but welcoming. Polished wood, worn smooth with use, formed the walls and furniture, all crafted with artisanal skill. Shelves displayed small wooden carvings, birds, forest animals, and human figures in various poses of labor. In one corner, a wood-burning stove still held the warmth of breakfast. John Woodman walked to an old chest covered with an embroidered cloth. From it he retrieved the diary of Francis of the Ages, which Granny Willow had entrusted to him. "Elizabeth, you mentioned the company has an interest in minerals in Elderstone Valley," he began, opening the diary to the pages containing the map. "This map is over 80 years old, but it shows something your geological surveys have likely detected." The map, drawn with surprising precision for its time, displayed the entire expanse of the Rocky Mountains. Specific points were marked with different symbols, spirals, concentric circles, and small animal figures. "Elderstone Valley isn't just an ecological corridor," John Woodman explained. "According to Francis of the Ages, it's one of the mountain's energy convergence points. The ancients knew these places as the veins of the earth." Elizabeth studied the map with growing interest, her scientific training momentarily at odds with what she saw. "These symbols, they seem to indicate different types of geological formations," she remarked, pointing at the markings. "And this one at the center of the valley aligns exactly with where our studies showed the highest concentration of rare minerals." "It's not just minerals," Granny Willow interjected. "These are points where the life force of the mountains gathers. The ancients knew this and protected these places. Removing what's there would be like tearing out the heart of the—" Mountain Gabriel, who had been quietly examining John Woodman's bookshelves, joined them at the table. "Grandpa, your carvings. They form a pattern," he noted, pointing to the small wooden figures. "If you look closely, each one seems to represent a specific place in the mountains." John Woodman smiled, pleased by the young man's keen observation. "My grandfather taught me to carve not just to make art, but to record the power spots of the mountains," he explained. "Each sculpture holds the essence of a location. Together, they form a three-dimensional map that connects with this one." He pointed to the journal. "But how does this help us stop the resort and the mining?" asked Elizabeth, pragmatic. "The map shows something else," said John Woodman, flipping the page to reveal another section not yet shown, the ancestral glade. "According to Francis of the Ages, it's where all the guardians of the mountains gather, the central point of all the energy. If we can get there and perform the ritual described in the diary, we can awaken the full protection of the mountains." "Ritual?" repeated Elizabeth, clearly skeptical. "With all due respect, Mr. Woodman, we need concrete solutions. Documents, evidence, legal action. And we'll have all that," he assured calmly. "Your documents are crucial. Gabriel's computer skills too. But the mountains have their own ways of protecting themselves, ways that science doesn't yet fully understand." A thoughtful silence fell over the group as the last ray of sunlight vanished on the horizon. Outside, the chirping of crickets began to fill the night, accompanied by the soft whisper of wind through the leaves. "Horizon Ventures plans to start marking the land in 3 days," Elizabeth informed, breaking the silence. "After this, it will be much harder to stop them legally." "Then we have to act first," concluded Gabriel, his young face lit with determination. "We can use the documents Elizabeth has to delay the process while we search for the ancestral glade." "It won't be easy to find," warned John Woodman. "According to the diary, the glade only reveals itself to those called by the Guardians, and even then, the path is protected by illusions and detours." "The black buffalo appeared to you and me," Elizabeth reminded them, her skeptical attitude giving way to genuine curiosity. "Does that mean we're chosen?" "Yes," confirmed Granny Willow. "And Gabriel too, though his calling came differently. He dreamed of the mountains before even coming here, didn't he?" The young man nodded, surprised that the grandmother knew about his recurring dreams that had motivated him to temporarily leave college in the city to visit her. "What do we need to do then?" he asked, looking at the 3 adults. John Woodman pulled a more recent topographic map of the region from a drawer and laid it over the old map from the diary. If you like this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit like. Let us know which city you're watching from. Stay tuned. The next morning dawned under a thick fog that wrapped around the mountains like a protective cloak. John Woodman, despite the persistent pain in his leg, prepared for the journey as he watched the sunrise from his porch. The golden light struggled to pierce through the mist, creating a spectacle of diffused light and elongated shadows. As planned the night before, Gabriel had already scanned the documents provided by Elizabeth and sent them to a lawyer friend in the capital specialized in environmental law. He'd also created a cloud backup, ensuring the evidence couldn't simply disappear. At 6 in the morning, Elizabeth arrived at John's house, dressed in practical hiking clothes with a small backpack on her shoulders. "I managed to get away for 2 days," she informed him. "I told Richard I needed to check some data at the springs on the southern slopes, far from Elderstone Valley." "Did he buy it?" asked John, handing her a mug of freshly brewed coffee. "He's too busy convincing the village youth to support the project," she replied with an ironic smile. "Offering free training for resort jobs, career promises. Need and ambition are dangerous advisors," remarked the woodsman, securing Francis of the Age's diary in a sturdy leather satchel he'd carry over his shoulder. Soon after, Gabriel and Granny Willow joined them. The young man carried modern equipment, a GPS, a comms radio, and a small waterproof camera. Technology and tradition. John smiled, pointing to the contrast between his own rustic gear and Gabriel's devices. "Grandma will stay in the village," the young man explained. "She'll be our contact with the locals and alert us if Horizon Ventures makes any suspicious moves." Granny Willow nodded, her serene expression masking her concern. "Always follow the call, not just the map," she advised, handing each of them small pouches of herbs. "Keep these in your pockets. They ward off chaotic energies and sharpen your perception." The first part of the trail was familiar, a path John Woodman had used for decades to reach the higher areas of the mountains. Even with his injured leg, he maintained a steady pace, his familiarity with the terrain making up for his physical limitation. Elizabeth and Gabriel followed, impressed by his endurance. As they climbed, the vegetation shifted subtly. The trees grew older, their twisted trunks telling stories of harsh winters and scorching summers. Occasionally, iridescent blue-winged butterflies crossed their path, as if guiding them. "These butterflies are rare," John remarked. "My grandfather used to say they're messengers of the guardians." After 3 hours of hiking, they reached a natural plateau that offered a panoramic view of the valley. Below, the village looked tiny, its houses like little colorful dots amid the green. On the other side, Elderstone Valley stretched out magnificently, its peculiar rock formations gleaming under the sun, which had now completely burned away the mist. "It's so much more breathtaking from up here," Elizabeth murmured, her voice a mix of awe and sadness. "How could anyone think of destroying this?" "For those who only see numbers on spreadsheets, beauty has no monetary value," replied John Woodman, consulting the old map and comparing it to the current landscape. "From here on, the path becomes less clear. According to the journal, we need to follow the Trail of the 7 Stones." Gabriel examined the terrain ahead, confused. "But there are dozens of rock formations everywhere. How do we identify the specific 7? John Woodman smiled, pulling a small wooden sculpture from his pocket, a butterfly with open wings. "This is the key," he explained. "When my grandfather taught me to carve, he said some pieces are more than art, they're tools." He placed the sculpture on a flat rock, and to Elizabeth Field's and Gabriel's surprise, the small wooden butterfly began to spin slowly, as if moved by an imperceptible breeze, until it pointed in a specific direction. "How is this possible?" Gabriel asked, stepping closer to examine the sculpture. "There's no visible mechanism." "Some woods, when cut under the right moon and shaped with specific intent, retain a connection to the place they came from," John Woodman explained. "This one was made from wood from Elderstone Valley itself." Following the direction indicated by the sculpture, they soon found the first of the 7 stones, a formation that faintly resembled a human face gazing at the sky. From there, the butterfly guided them to the second, and so on, forming a zigzagging path that wouldn't be obvious to anyone simply observing the terrain. The fourth stone led them to an almost imperceptible entrance in the dense vegetation, a narrow gap between two rocky walls that, from any other angle, would seem like just another unimportant natural formation. "We're on the right path," confirmed John Woodman, consulting the journal again. Francis mentions this passage as the Whispering Portal. As they crossed the narrow rocky corridor, the sound of the wind shifted, taking on an almost musical quality, as if the mountains themselves were breathing around them. Elizabeth, the most skeptical of the group, felt a shiver run down her spine. "Do you hear that?" she asked, pausing for a moment. "It sounds almost like voices." The rocky passage finally opened into a perfectly circular clearing, so perfect it seemed impossible to have been formed by nature alone. Ancient, towering. Trees encircled the space, their intertwined canopies creating a natural cathedral through which golden rays of the afternoon sun filtered. At the center, 7 stones arranged in a ring surrounded a crystalline formation that reflected light in every direction, casting tiny rainbows across the moss-covered ground. "The ancestral glade," murmured John Woodman, his heart racing with the thrill of discovery. Exactly as Francis described. Elizabeth turned slowly, absorbing every detail of the mystical place with wide-eyed wonder. All her scientific training had not prepared her for the sense of reverence this space evoked. "It's like time works differently in here," remarked Gabriel, noticing how the air felt almost thick, charged with a palpable energy. A sudden movement at the edge of the clearing caught all 3 of them by surprise. Amidst the trees, silent and majestic, emerged the imposing figure of the black buffalo. Its amber eyes seemed to hold all the wisdom of the world as it observed the visitors with calm contemplation. "He has come," whispered John Woodman, bowing his head slightly in a respectful gesture. As if answering an invisible call, other creatures began to emerge from the forest, an exceptionally large jaguar, a vibrantly colored toucan that perched on one of the circle's stones, an emerald serpent that slithered silently to another stone. One by one, 7 different animals took their places beside the stones, forming a perfect circle around the 3 humans. "The 7 guardians," explained John Woodman, his voice barely above a whisper, each representing a vital aspect of the mountains. At the center of the glade, the crystal began to pulse with its own light, first softly, then with growing intensity, responding to the presence of the guardians. "What should we do now?" asked Elizabeth, her voice trembling with emotion. John Woodman opened the diary to the last pages, where Francis of the Ages had recorded the ritual. "We must take specific positions and recite the words of awakening," he explained, pointing to the spots. "Gabriel, you stand on the east stone representing dawn and new ideas. Elizabeth on the south stone representing transformation and growth. I will take the west stone representing wisdom and the twilight of life." As they took their places, the black buffalo moved to the north stone, completing the circle. The other animals remained in their positions, watching in solemn silence. Following the diary's instructions, the 3 began reciting in unison words from an ancient language, which John Woodman had explained was the original dialect of the first inhabitants of the mountains. Strangely, despite never having heard that language before, both Gabriel and Elizabeth felt the words flow naturally, as if they had known them all along. As the chant progressed, the crystal at the center pulsed more intensely, casting beams of light that connected each participant in the circle. The ground of the ancestral glade began to tremble softly, and the wind, previously absent in that sheltered space, rose in a gentle whirlwind, carrying leaves and seeds in a hypnotic dance. It was then that Elizabeth saw something extraordinary. Luminous shapes emerged from the earth, translucent human silhouettes joining the circle. Men and women from different eras, dressed in garments ranging from indigenous loincloths to clothing from the last century. Among them, a woman with long hair and a serene gaze who looked strikingly like Granny Willow. Francis of the Ages, John Woodman identified, seeing the same apparition, and all the human guardians who came before us. The chant reached its peak, and the central crystal burst into light, not destructively, but expanding in concentric waves that spread beyond the glade, sweeping through the forest, traversing every valley and peak of the mountains. It was as if the entire region breathed in sync, a living, conscious organism awakening from a long slumber. In the minds of the three participants, images began to flow. They saw the mountains in ancient times, inhabited by people living in perfect harmony with nature. They saw the first settlers, some destroying, others learning and respecting. They saw periods of balance and imbalance across the centuries. Then, like a sped-up film, they saw the present and the immediate future. Horizon Ventures machinery. Entering Elderstone Valley, the start of construction, the deforestation. But they also saw growing resistance, residents uniting, documents being revealed in public hearings, young people protesting. And they saw the mountains themselves reacting, unexpected storms, strategic landslides that harmed no one but halted the progress of the work. As suddenly as it began, the vision ceased. The crystal returned to its normal glow, and the animal guardians one by one bowed their heads in farewell before retreating into the forest. The ancestral silhouettes faded with the wind, leaving only a sense of peace and determination. For several minutes the three remained silent, processing what they had experienced. It was Gabriel who finally spoke. "That wasn't just a vision, it was a plan of action," he said, his voice filled with awe and purpose. "We know exactly what we need to do now." Elizabeth nodded, her scientific skepticism now comfortably coexisting with the mystical certainty she had just experienced. "I need to go back and gather more evidence," she stated. "Now I know exactly where to look and who in the company can help us." John Woodman took one last look at the spot where the black buffalo had vanished among the trees. "The mountains have awakened," he said simply. "Now we're just part of something much greater." As they left the glade, they noticed the path back seemed much clearer and more direct, as if the forest itself was helping them return quickly. The sun was beginning to set when they reached the edge of the village. Waiting for them in the central square was a surprising sight. Granny Willow had gathered practically the entire community, including many of the young people who had initially supported the resort. Beside her, standing on a small makeshift stage, were Father Anthony and, even more surprisingly, the mayor of the small town, known for his early support of Horizon Ventures project. "What's going on?" Gabriel asked his grandmother. When they managed to approach, "The mountains work in mysterious ways, my grandson," she replied with an enigmatic smile. "While you were at the ancestral glade, the mayor received some interesting visits from the Environmental Protection Agency, bringing very specific questions about permits and impact studies." John Woodman observed the crowd, noticing how the mood was one of unity and determination, not division like after Horizon Ventures' presentation. "And the young people?" he asked, seeing many who once dreamed of jobs at the resort, now seemingly on the side of preservation. Mr. George, the former teacher, showed them an alternative community ecotourism project he'd developed years ago, explained Granny. Willow, a project where the community would be the owner and manager, not just employees. The idea spread faster than dry kindling. Richard Mason watched the scene from afar, his usually confident demeanor now replaced by obvious concern. When he saw Elizabeth returning with John Woodman and Gabriel, his expression hardened further. "This isn't over," Gabriel remarked, noticing the businessman's gaze. "No," John Woodman agreed. "But the mountains are awake now, and so are we." That night, from the window of his house atop the hill, John Woodman gazed at the vastness of the Rocky Mountains bathed in moonlight. On the distant horizon, clouds gathered, promising rain for the next day. A movement in the yard caught his attention. Down below, majestic and serene, the black buffalo watched him. Its amber eyes gleamed with ancient wisdom, and for a brief moment, man and beast shared an understanding that transcended words. Then, as silently as he had arrived, the guardian vanished into the night, leaving only footprints in the damp earth, footprints that by morning light many would see and talk about, spreading once more the old stories of the protectors of the mountains who appeared in times of need. The battle for the Rocky Mountains had only just begun, but now it was a fight where the forces were balanced. For as Frances of the Ages wrote in her diary, when the mountains awaken, their children walk with the strength of the ancestors, and no power built solely on greed can prevail. If this story intrigued you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit like. Let us know which city you're watching from.